Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you happenstance into this wonderful dialogue with the new Untouchables and our special guest this afternoon. This morning is David Cay Johnston, the editor-in-chief of DC Report, and we're recording this special broadcast on December 30th. Happy New Year to you all, 2025, at approximately 11 a.m. Eastern Time. And to kick things off here, I want to share the screen and bring into view the article of which we will be discussing, which is huge news that seemingly is under the radar for the mainstream. According to DC Report, big banks enjoy stealth bailouts, a DC Report exclusive. And of course, there's a picture of Jamie Dimon, and the headline, subheadline, is yet again the big banks are short of cash, signs of another historic bailout and recession to come. And I'll just read quickly the first two paragraphs to set this up, but ominous signs that at least one of America's too big to fail banks is yet again seriously short of cash emerged this weekend in documents examined by James Henry, DC Report economics correspondent. For the past 2 months, the Federal Reserve has been silently injecting tens of billions of dollars of cash into banks. No one announced this. Henry found the evidence in public records that few, if any, Wall Street journalists consult, but that we routinely, I'm sorry if I'm having a problem. Routinely, I don't know why my mouth is messed up, review a DC Report. The Federal Reserve of New York, acting like a financial Santa Claus to recklessly naughty bankers, delivered $17 billion in cash to an unknown bank or banks at 8 a.m. the morning after Christmas. That's just the latest scary development that has gone unreported until now. David, pretty amazing insight into something that some of us have been concerned about for many years, particularly after the 2008 great financial crisis. Can you please provide your insight of how this information came to be?
Sure. Well, Jim Henry, our economics correspondent, James S. Henry, is such a savvy guy that while he was in his 20s, he became the chief economist at McKinsey and Company, the world's leading business consulting firm. And he was later a direct report to Jack Welch, the head of General Electric. And he threw all that away to spend his life examining illicit finance, money laundering, and other financial matters that all of us are familiar with in this group. And so he was looking around for things we should be reporting, and he came across a chart at the New York Federal Reserve Bank, which is the Federal Reserve Bank that services Wall Street. And he found an amazing pattern. For more than 5 years, there had been just a couple of very small transactions known as repos. That's where a bank needing cash delivers treasury, bonds and notes, mortgages, and other securities to the Fed, and in return gets 100 cents on the dollar in cash immediately, and it's super low interest rate, something Bill can talk about, Bill Black, later in this conversation. Well, on Halloween, over $50 billion of cash was delivered to one or more banks. The Fed doesn't disclose which banks. Since then, there's been a multi-billion-dollar infusion of cash roughly every 3 days. Now, these are relatively short-term deals. They last days or a few weeks, but it tells you there's a real cash problem. And lo and behold, we know that the nation's biggest bank, J.P. Morgan, a subsidiary of the holding company J.P. Morgan Chase and Company, has made a terribly bad bet on silver. They own about 5,900 tons of silver, or rather, they sold 5,900 tons of silver they don't own, and they have to replace. And there's not enough tradable liquid trades out there for them to get out of this deal. They took way too big of a bet. They've also made a bad bet on crypto. They thought it would go up. It's going down. And there are some other commodities that they're invested in. And these have been the subject of a lot of discussion by speculators who look around for opportunities where big players make bad judgments and it shapes the market. JP Morgan, surprise, surprise, has not returned our phone calls. They basically only talk to reporters who are friendly and will repeat their nonsense or their truths. Um, we do know that at least one journalist yesterday called the New York Fed, who was told, oh, this is all routine. We do it all the time. And this journalist was savvy enough to say, well, no, actually, the chart shows you went about 5 years and 3 months with almost no deals at all. And now you're doing them every few days. And the spokesperson was sort of, I'm not sure, because they don't know what to say when there's a reporter who doesn't just rely on handouts and official pronouncements, as this one did. Haven't seen an article yet by that reporter, but I am hoping we will. Meanwhile, there's been a new development today. The price of silver has gone up about 7% so far today, which means if you're short on silver, if like Chase, you sold silver you didn't own, hoping to buy it back at a lower price, and that's how you make a profit. You sell high and buy low, the opposite of what most of us hope to do, which is buy low and sell high. That would mean Chase is under further strain unless they've somehow found a way to unwind these deals. And underlying all of this is something that should be a major concern to American citizens, but it won't ever be because it's too pointy-headed and complicated. The bankers have basically persuaded Congress, hey, we know what we're doing. People wouldn't trust us with their money unless we knew what we're doing. So you don't really need to pay much attention to what we're doing. When they're told we have to have a stress test, as Bill Black revealed some time ago, so they said, oh, the regulators were, all right, we'll have a stress test. And it's a test you cannot fail. You can't fail it. It's designed to make sure you can't fail it, no matter what condition you're in. And as a result of this lack of real regulation, guess what? Traders get out over their skis. I'm sure that if this becomes a big public issue at some point, that JP Morgan will say, well, we had a trader or a couple of traders who went outside their authority. How do you go outside your authority? When this last happened to them in 2012, they lost about $6 billion. They passed off to one of the most Wall Street friendly journalists in the country, Andrew Ross Sorkin, used to sit a couple of desks away from me at the New York Times, that they had a small problem, maybe $1 billion problem, and that a hedge, that's an instrument designed to reduce risk. You can't make as much profit, but you can't lose as much. That a hedge morphed into a speculative bet. Well, a hedge is a complex legal document. I'm sure that Marc Dann can talk about that. It's not, some back of the envelope deal. It's a complex legal document. And what I wrote at the time, to the utter annoyance of the editors at Reuters, where I was a global columnist at the time, a hedge can no more morph into a speculative bet than my marriage could morph into a dog. And what's really going on here is that the bankers are not being properly regulated. And you could go back in history for more than 2,000 years. I used to teach the law of the ancient world, which is why I know this, and show how if you don't regulate bankers, guess what? You'll rue the day you didn't do it. So why are we concerned about this? Well, if even just Chase's JP Morgan Bank is in trouble, let's assume nobody else, it's all them. They're the biggest bank in the country. And the Fed, the New York Fed, clearly expects more trouble because what I found out after pursuing Jim's reporting, because I can write faster than he can, just a difference in skill sets, was that on December 10th, the New York Fed announced a policy change, very badly worded change, not the kind of thing you find in the Federal Register written by lawyers, some sloppily written piece. But it said that effective the next day, there would be no limits on the amount of cash the banking industry can get from the New York Fed. It did limit individual banks. Now, depending on how you read the sloppily written language, each individual bank can get up to $240 billion in a day, or if you read it very narrowly, $80 billion. So let me put these big numbers that don't mean anything to any of us in perspective. The six so-called too big to fail banks, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, JP Morgan, et cetera. Last year, their total profits were $152 billion. What that means is that in a single day, by the narrowest reading of this announcement, any two banks can get more cash, $160 billion, 80 billion each, than all six of them made in profits for a whole year. Why would the Fed throw open the vaults and say unlimited cash when you need it unless they're expecting big trouble? So,
Well, Bill, that is obviously the perfect tee up to you. Obviously, you were one of the you know the more prominent regulators in American history. Obviously,
Bill, wait a minute, you're understating that, Patrick. Bill is the national hero who figured out the savings and loan scandal in the late 80s, early 90s, who got over 3,000 active criminal investigations and almost 900, I think that's the right number, maybe it's almost 1,000, but I believe it's almost 900 high level bankers, including heads of banks and bank holding companies, locked up in prison.
amen, amen, David Cay. Actually, I think we're up to about 7,000 convictions, Bill.
Well, that's with the banking and the thrift industry, and we shouldn't forget that the banking regulators perform magnificently in the criminal referral business as well.
Right, and you've been guiding us the whole time through our work, which brought all of the new untouchables together and everything else. And a couple of things that David Cay discussed that I want to respond to just briefly to set you up, though. Repo should be a household name after the 2008 great financial crisis, and what nobody understands what happened in 2019, for example. And we all on this panel saw what Dodd-Frank was intended to do. But here we are during the Trump administration. It makes so much sense. And I do recall, I don't know, vaguely a couple of years ago, that during the Biden administration also that there was going to be injections of capital to what we call the too big to fail banks under certain circumstances. And I was wondering if this might be what that was laid up to create. But meanwhile, this information is only coming through DC report. I find that somewhat astounding.
Well, I don't find it astounding at all, but David Cay is far more expert on why things get covered and don't get covered at major media, particularly in the financial sphere. I can tell you how difficult it was to get journalists to take seriously the savings and loan debacle, but about 1 in 10 really would be interested, and you'd invest the time with them, and they would invest from their perspective a ton of time. And that's how the really breakthrough stuff occurred. But this is actually a different hat of mine. I was actually a banker. You know, I was the general counsel of a $50 billion bank, the Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco, and sat on the credit committee, and not in some nominal fashion, as a full voting member, because this was a big part of my life, dealing with credit quality as a regulator. So we are talking about the biggest financial market in the world, and nothing comes quite close. And this will give you some perspective on the numbers that David Cay has just given us. The entire U.S. repo market on a typical day is around 12.6 trillion. That's with a T, 1,000 billion. So in size. And that'll give you a flavor of what it means to do the massive transactions that they're now doing to bail out presumptively JP Morgan for the reasons David Cay has just gone through. And John Henry has been so critical in identifying. Okay. The next biggest market is the European version, and that's about 7.5 trillion. Also massive, but like 60-40 US to the next biggest market in the world. And this market is super designed over the course of, they began around 1917 in the US. So, uh, over a century to deliver the lowest possible interest rate to borrowers. So everything is designed around safety nominally, right? They're secured loans. They're very short term. They are in the US, the distinctive thing is they're in jargon trilateral. That just means there's three parties. But of course, weird to a transaction, right? A lending transaction, usually there's a borrower and lender. There's a borrower, a lender, and a trustee. And that is actually created, as David Kay it was alluding to structure these things as if they were a sale, but only to create an actual loan, but the one that won't run afoul of the automatic stay in the bankruptcy laws, right? So normally, if I make a loan and you declare bankruptcy, I can't do anything because of the automatic stay. I just have to get in line as a creditor, and maybe 3 years from now, and under U.S. Bankruptcy, I would get some money. That would obviously be a big problem for banks. So instead, this third party, the bank, holds the collateral, and they make what's called a collateral call when you don't have enough collateral because the market's gone the wrong way. And if you don't answer that collateral call within minutes, they sell the collateral and pay the other party. Okay? So this is really souped up stuff to be absolute great stuff for the biggest banks in the world, but in particular in America, so they can borrow super cheap, super quickly, and then they could, back to the great financial crisis, because you didn't really sell, because it was with this third party trustee, the bank, you could use it again and again. That's how they created those CDOs, the collateralized debt obligations. Because if you had actually sold it, you couldn't then sell it to somebody else as a collateralized debt obligation. So this is how they supercharged the great financial crisis. So to David's point, and what he's revealed today, of course, is this whole thing is supposed to be prudent, and instead it's now the monster of speculation. So Jamie Dimon famously, his huge embarrassment was what he called the London, or what people call the London whale, right? And this is what David Kay was discussing. So we don't want people speculating like that. We certainly don't want banks, which are federally insured, taking massive speculative positions. What does that add to a global economy? It is just a pure play as a too big to fail entity in which they basically put a gun to their own head and say, bail us out or we'll shoot. And if we shoot, by the way, Trump, your administration collapses. Oh, and by the way, Chairman of the Fed, your reputation dies with us. So it's this pure hostage play. This is absolutely insane after the London whale to allow a pure speculative massive bet in which you meant that JP Morgan would fail if you lost the bet. People like that should not be in charge of a $30 million credit union. They are in charge of the most dangerous financial institutions in their world. Their incentives are massively perverse, and we are undertaking policies that supercharge their perverse incentives and their perverse abilities. And we're doing it after they screwed us, not once, but many, many times. That's what David Kay and Henry have brought to us.
Right.
And you see why other places aren't like Sorkin they'd have to be tortured to take a lead on breaking a story like this.
Yeah, at least we forget that Sorkin wasn't talking to you or the rest of this panel in the writing of Too Big to Fail. Not to mention, of course, this might come as a surprise to many of the viewers that are watching this, and let's hope you all like and subscribe and share, because that's the way this information's got to get out there. If there's a massive silence towards this and what it means, but we've been here before. This is third verse, same of the first, and I think to myself, after everything that we've discovered through this whole time period, it's because people aren't putting you guys in positions to be able to regulate this stuff, that this massive deformity of what we might call capitalism is occurring, but it's not when it's, of course, bailed out. And I think to you, Paul, being in the middle of all of the things with AIG back in the time period, can you describe what it was like being at the DOJ at that level when the entire market was melting down from what you saw, because all of these complicated derivatives and everything else, but then that ultimately would lead to an infusion of bailouts of this system that you obviously had a front row seat to what they were doing that was criminal?
Well, I guess the way that I would talk about it, first of all, I'm not an expert in anything that Bill or David has talked about, but what I do know is that unless you have effective regulators, unless you have effective leadership at FBI, unless you have effective DOJ leadership, then what they're talking about is going to continue to happen, and nothing is going to stop it. And so back during the great financial crisis, what we learned is that the regulators were asleep at the switch. There were no criminal referrals, as Bill has talked about, that DOJ leadership was asleep at the switch, and that the FBI was effectively asleep at the switch. So, and then when they did start moving forward after all the animals had left the barn and the country was in a state of collapse economically, after, I was going to say, 3 to 5 years where all the bankers, including Jamie Dimon, were patting themselves on the back at how great bankers they were as they were investing in all this crap, and Hank Greenberg and all of them were patting themselves on the back on what great financial minds they were, and literally it was a house of cards. What we learned is that, number one, on the front end, nobody was regulating this stuff, these credit default swaps, these CDOs, these synthetic credit default swaps. Nobody even knew what they were, right? And it was just laissez-faire in my opinion. So in DOJ and the FBI are not equipped to act on the front end, right? They act, after the crime has occurred. It's the regulators who are supposed to act on the front end. But what we do know now is that as far as regulation, no one's in charge, no one's doing anything. We have incompetence supreme. And then on the back end, as the crimes are revealed, we obviously have an FBI and a DOJ that are not ready for prime time now. So, back then we at least had the soldiers that needed to be put in place that never were to tackle the crimes. But now we don't even have that. So I don't think there's a good ending here. But what I do see is, and if you could put that chart that David had in the DCR report yesterday with the infusions of cash, what I look at as a prosecutor is, can the banks explain? It seems to me, David, that you went, or somebody, Jim went, or somebody went and asked them what's going on here. And they weren't able to explain that. There's that chart right there. Yeah. And I would ask David, what does it mean to you that banks can't explain this? Because as a prosecutor, when I'm looking for a crime to prosecute a crime, I'm looking for lying, cheating, and deceiving, right? And in the great financial crisis, there was the loans on the front end that were being made that weren't being made with any collateral. There were lies as it relates to that. And then on the back end, all the banks and financial institutions were lying about the valuations of their portfolios. So you have lies on both ends. I'm trying to figure out here sort of where the lies are that you would prosecute. And I'd love to know your view, David, as to sort of why the banks can't explain what's going on.
Well, Marc can deal with the legal issue far better than I ever could. But first of all, JP Morgan doesn't return my phone calls. They don't return phone calls of what anybody they don't regard as friendly. The Fed yesterday, in at least one case we know about, tried to bamboozle a journalist by saying, oh, we do these transactions all the time. They're routine. They are routine. As Bill pointed out, there's an enormous repo market. The problem is that we went more than 5 years, as this chart shows, with virtually no transactions like this. So I don't expect JP Morgan will ever respond to us. If this if this becomes broadly reported in the news, I can tell you what they will call in and tell friendly reporters. Oh, this is just routine business, and the people writing about it, they hate banks and they don't know what they're talking about. Because I've been to this rodeo a few times in the past. So the underlying, it seems to me, a problem is that the Fed knows there's a problem. The important element here, I believe, is the decision to say no limits on the amount of cash you can get almost virtually instantaneously by putting up treasuries, mortgages, and the third set of assets, which are called agency, term of art. So that it just tells you the Fed knows there's potentially enormous trouble coming because of mispricing essentially these things. Back in 2008, we found out that the notional value, the written number for all of the credit swaps that were going on at the time was something like 10 times the net worth of the planet. I may be off on that number, but it was completely out of scale to the financial condition of the world. So anyway, I wonder what Marc
Well, yeah,
says.
I want to set Marc up for this too, as well, because Marc, look, your team, when you guys were endeavoring all of the, the liar's loans, obviously, your forensic accountant made a call to none other than Goldman Sachs. And they said, there's nothing to see here. Meanwhile, we now know, 15, 20 years later, everything they were in the midst of, that you guys were actually, you had the information. I'm wondering how you're responding to this information.
Well, I want to react to Paul's quaint notion of a Justice Department and a regulator and a team of federal regulators that are simply indifferent. Those were the good old days, unfortunately, in this country.
Sleep at the switch.
Sleep at the switch would be preferable to where we are now. And remember, the Trump administration is about to, is on the brink of taking over the Federal Reserve chairmanship, and with somebody who I can assure you will have promised President Trump that they will do whatever is necessary to drive down interest rates to temporarily stimulate the economy. Which flood this kind of flooding of the market is exactly the way to do it. So this will not just be not stopped. We're walking into a chapter in American economic history where it's going to be encouraged, except for the people that don't pony up and pay their tribute. Because crypto was mentioned here, David, as a footnote to the silver, but the crypto is as a commodity has all of those characteristics of silver, and there is a limit to how much crypto can be created, and it just can't be magically replaced, and so now we have a Justice Department that's it's not just incompetent, or it's not just looking for a job on Wall Street like it was during the Obama administration. It's a fucking clown car of people that are intended to benefit the patrons of the supporters of the president at the expense of the rest of us. So it all the old analysis has to go, in my view, has to go out the window. And so the good news is that this is a transparent clown car. We've been able to see much more clearly what they're doing and how they're and how they're operating. And so that may be the saving grace, that it's going to become so obvious that even Andrew Ross Sorkin and the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and the other financial press will have to report on it. And maybe in time, for the 2026 election, where the public can do something to stop this. But I mean, this is less of a legal analysis to me at this point than a political analysis. And that's what's that's what's scary, because if it would be like feeding amphetamines to 2008, to have this crew of regulators in charge. And remember, we had George, for better or worse, and I think in many ways it was for worse. We had George W. Bush going hand in hand with Barack Obama to Congress and saying, we got to do something responsible here. There's no adult in the room anymore. And so Bill, I can tell you're chomping at the bit to jump in here, but I'm the legal analysis. I don't know that it matters. The corruption analysis, which is, David, where your institution, your publication is going to become instrumental potentially to saving the future of the republic, because
I hope so.
Publications like yours and the American Prospect and the like, that are the independent journalists that have not been yet co-opted, are going to be the difference potentially between what's happened. So first of all, thank you for having a worse retirement so that the rest of us can have a retirement at all. But yeah, so I'm going to pitch it back to you, but it's a politician in me that is apoplectically scared about what this kind of stuff means, because there's a grown-up still in that room that's floating out that cash right now, and that guy's not going to be there. Not that he'd be my favorite grown up to be in charge, but at least the guy as an economist who actually gives some consideration to the impact of what they're doing. That's all gone in just a few months.
Bill,
I want to do a 20-second
can I
interjection just to say that Marc is being too modest. So the federal government actively tried to protect the fraudsters through preemption of state efforts.
Right.
And despite those efforts, Marc and his counterparts are the only folks who brought the effective actions. And this was done also under a Department of Justice regime where they officially stated that there was no such thing as looting. That CEOs of banks never looted their banks, even though historically that's the leading cause of the worst losses. Sorry.
No.
Eric Holder rolled out the red carpet for Jamie Dimon during the investigation of the banks.
All of which is in the con, by the way, which we'd love to get back out there, but we'll address that later. But June, please, I can't wait to hear what your thoughts are.
I have questions, lots of questions, but let me start with a couple of basic ones. The first, David, in reading your wonderful piece, it reminded me of the debate certainly at the time AIG failed. And that is, the grown-ups in the room wanted bailouts because they saw a systemic run as a major risk, taking down the global economy, not just the US. And so my question about this, how much is a handout to irresponsible actors? And how much is, oh my God, something awful is coming down the pike?
Well, let me put on my law professor hat. And I'm just the audience, I'm not a lawyer, but I've taught law now for 16 years. There's a balancing act.
And by the way, I'm scared because I am a lawyer and I'm scared to death. They've asked me to teach a law school class and I'm having nightmares about it already. So God bless you for being able to do it without that.
Go watch the paper chase before you go teach.
I will.
We have to make sure that ordinary people are protected and safe. Back in 2008, or maybe, I think it was 2008, there was a brief period where they lifted the limit on the guarantee for your FDIC. And it went from 100,000 to 250,000. At the time, my oldest son and I had a business managing a hotel. We didn't own it, we managed it. But we had $800,000. And I had my son go and put the money in 8 different banks because the limit was $100,000. And we couldn't afford to lose that. And we need to really keep in mind, if things go badly here, that we cannot go through another cycle as we did in 2008 that wiped out ordinary people. By some measures, economists have shown that the 2008 collapse, the Great Recession, was worse and caused more enduring harm than the Great Depression that began in 1929. Households under 35 have never, headed by someone 35 or younger at the time, have never fully recovered from this as a class. So on the one hand, it may be absolutely crucial to bail people out, but I don't see any reason to bail out the executives. And so long as we continue to pay the executives of these regulated financial institutions with stock options, and they have an absolute vested interest in manipulating the market, in allowing big bets, because, and this is Jim Henry, he calls them banksters. But he points out that in a heads we win, tails the government will pick up our losses, there is no incentive to really rein in risky behavior. And banks that hold people's retail and small business deposits should not be in this business. And they were not until Glass-Steagall was the 1930s law that said, you can be in insurance, you can be in underwriting stocks, that's a risky business, you can be in banking, but you got to pick one. And we've now put them all back together. And systemically, this has to create future problems because of the nature of the beast. Unfortunately, all sorts of people have been persuaded to the notion that we need to deregulate. And one of the key things I teach my law students when I was teaching the history of business regulation from Hammurabi's Code in the Old Testament until today and where we're going in the future is there is no deregulation. There is only re-regulation, generally on behalf of the owners and the politically connected against everybody else. We need to have regulation that's not controlled by the regulated. And that requires a fundamental change in the attitude of people in the country. And one of the good things about that is all the polling data, every bit of it, all the social science data is showing people 30 and under, and perhaps 35 and under, have said, I've had it with American-style crony capitalism. This is not working for me. And it will take time, but we may actually get somewhere because of that kind of change, June. So you said questions.
Yes. So the other thing is Jamie Dimon in June said the economy is getting ready to deteriorate. But these bets sound like bets that the economy is not about to deteriorate.
Well, it depends. I mean, selling silver short was a bet that there'd be less demand for silver. The market was overheated. And it's short selling, where you sell something you don't own, hoping to put it back at a lower price. We need that. It's a discipline on the market, but we also need sort of limits on how much risk you can take. I mean, 5,900 tons of silver? My God.
Yeah.
So I think.
What are they doing? What's your read on why they're?
Somebody looked at this and said the market is misreading demand. Silver prices have almost tripled since Trump took office. So somebody took a look at it and said, this is way overheated. the price has to fall. We can make a lot of money. Sell all these silver contracts. They're sold in 5,000 ounce contracts. These are troy ounces, not the kind we use in the kitchen. And we can make a lot of money. And it's just way too over concentrated of a bet. There are two ways to look at finance. Put all your eggs in one basket and then watch that basket very carefully, which works if you own your own business. And the other is own a broad portfolio so that, yeah, this collapsed, but this is okay. And over the long run, you'll do okay. There's an old saying on Wall Street that has been, I think, largely forgotten. In fact, there are two business sayings that have been forgotten. The first one, not particularly relevant to this, but I think important, is properly paid employees are free. If you pay too little, your business is inefficient. If you pay too much, you're giving away the store. The other one is about Wall Street. Bears get rich. That's the short sellers. Bulls get rich. That's most of us, the long buyers of stocks. But pigs get slaughtered. And Jamie Dimon runs a pig slaughtering operation that the government steps in to save the pigs.
David, aren't there rules that require them to hedge bets like that?
Yes, absolutely. But if your hedge isn't properly priced, it's meaningless. That was the point I was making about the notional value of the credit swaps was completely out of proportion to the value of assets in the world. And we had, Bill, correct me if I'm wrong, but when June and Bill and I and a bunch of other people met in Kansas City 14 years ago to go over what happened in the collapse of the economy, Congress gave $10 million to have a study done. By the way, the Monica Lewinsky investigation was over $100 million. So they gave a little tiny budget. The report that was done, which I've actually slogged through, no one's ever shown a single error in it. And the minute Congress got this report, they threw it in the round file. And for those who don't know that hoary term, they threw it in the trash can. But nobody's shown an error in it. One of the things we discussed there was that there were credit swaps against credit swaps against credit swaps against credit swaps against credit swaps, so that if you pulled one thread, everything collapsed. And I suspect, I don't know for a fact, but I suspect something roughly similar in economic terms is going on now. But Bill would understand this better than any of us.
So the key saying in the trade is every trader's first option is on the firm.
Which means
you win, you're the managing director. You lose, you can't bear $1 billion loss. The firm bears the loss.
And so you're out.
It's a wonderful naked option from the perspective of traders who are not terribly risk averse to begin with. And in this one, if they win so big that it transforms life and the economy and such. And
yeah, I have two friends in journalism, Bill, who are incredibly wealthy, and they work for newspaper wages because they don't care. They both decided they wanted to be journalists. They wanted to make a lot of money so that they didn't need to worry about anything. And they're great, fabulous journalists. The problem is we don't have enough people like them. We have too many people who they cover by press release, official announcement, and they don't understand how things work. I mean, one of the things I emphasize to my law and business students is that you need to understand how things go. When I was very young, I had the good fortune to have a mentor, Wallace Turner at the New York Times, who was so fantastic. He had a personal contract with the publisher that permanently kept him in San Francisco. I mean, I can't imagine having that kind of power. And he would say, there are two kinds of journalists out there. Those who get a note in their typewriter telling them what to go do today, and those who know how the world works. And that's what we need more of, those who know how the world works.
It isn't actually true that you are required to hedge. It just changes your capital requirement, potentially. Okay. And hedging is one of the most weirdly discretionary aspects of all finance. So as a practical matter, you can get away with massively unhedged positions without it even affecting your capital. This is what Fannie and Freddie both ran into, if you recall, way back in the day before the great financial crisis, when they made massive interest rate bets in opposite directions.
Bill, let me raise a point that if you, unless the rules have changed, if you sign an agreement with your broker, uh, Merrill Lynch, whomever, that you can buy stocks on the margin, you're also giving them permission to use your portfolio for their trades. And a number of people who were at Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns when they collapsed were wiped out. I mean, I had Bill Maher tell me personally that he got his insured coverage, which I think was $4 million at the time, but he lost $70 million in the collapse. If I'm right that that's still the rule, my guess is there are huge numbers of Americans who have fortunes at the investment houses and have no clue at how big of a risk they're at just because they signed an agreement that would allow them to trade on the margin, even if they never trade on the margin.
Yes, but even more broadly than that, they are at risk in those houses because there isn't a real equivalent of federal deposit insurance for obvious reasons on those bets. So those folks at least know they're in a much riskier world. As you say, it's the taxpayers. We don't get a vote,
Yeah.
effective vote in any of this. And yeah, the best economic estimate of the present value of lost GDP due to the great financial crisis is 41.7 trillion.
Right. And let me put that in context. That was in 2010. I went and looked up the study by
Yes.
Professor Alexander Field at Santa Clara University. And that at the time was more than 2 years of the entire economic output of the whole country. So in the last 17 years since the collapse, we basically went 2 years with no economic activity as a way to look at that. So, by the way, June, I don't think we finished your questions.
Oh, I think
All
we got to
we
a bunch of them.
misogynists here need to be respectful.
Simply a brief note on that committee investigating the causes. They blocked Bill from being hired as a staff member because they were afraid of what he might uncover. Um,
As the lead investigator.
Yeah.
and Bill, why don't you describe the minority view of what happened? Which part of your role was to make it clear it was made up entirely, but blaming the financial crisis on the Community Reinvestment Act and loans to minority borrowers.
Yeah, so it's the usual thing of Republicans playing hardball and Democrats playing wiffle ball. Every Republican appointee to that commission was vetted for would they, do the right thing for the banking industry. The Democrats were more of the random, somebody that respects you and you get put on. So there was one block versus everything else. There was also sort of a mole in as one of the attorneys who ends up, in the banking industry undermining stuff. But you're quite right. The campaign was led by Peter Wallison, who's led this campaign since the Reagan administration when he was a key staffer on deregulation. And everything was designed to blame the primary, as David Cay just explained, the primary victims of the great financial crisis
Well, remember the FBI.
became the villains under Wollaston's tail, and Wollaston's tail was entirely a lie. And he wrote a minority report of something like 150 pages, which is like also unheard of.
Remember that the FBI in I think 2006 put out a statement that there were two kinds of mortgage fraud going on in the country. And the mortgage frauds were by people who were lying to qualify for mortgages, and then people who might have qualified but weren't going to pay the loans back. They didn't in any way say, oh, by the way, there's also bankers who are in what Bill developed as the theory of control fraud, ripping off their own banks, or as Bill titled his book very brilliantly, The Best Way to Rob a Bank is to Own One. But the official position of the FBI was The bankers can't do anything wrong. They aren't doing anything wrong. It's entirely these scummy people out there who are tricking the banks.
And
Yes,
we got all
the
of those
bankers with the victims.
And we got all of those answers and then some in our work, The Con, including what the FBI didn't do by way of criminal referrals. But bringing it back to you really quick on Wallison, Bill, and the rest of the group, I actually had an interview with Wallison that I have on the shelf that we couldn't get into season 2 of The Con. And we were in the belly of the beast at the American Enterprise Institute across the street from the Trump Hotel. And Wallison looked at me after we went through all aspects of control fraud, and he knew we knew our stuff. And he knew our proximity view, and he looked at me square in the camera, and he says, "It's all rather Orwellian, isn't it?" Don't forget that Wallison was general counsel to during the Reagan administration. Don Regan, right? Was it Regan? Yeah. So this guy's been there, done that from the very beginning. And I want to turn that back to you, June, briefly, because you've warned us throughout the beginning of these new untouchables, right? That let's just hope that it's only a major financial crisis, but we've heard, before the context of what happens after, right? World War, all of the horrible things that follow, which seems to be in repeat. When you look at this right now, June, given everything that we're talking about and that David Cay and DC report, at this moment, to my knowledge, and I haven't looked at all the headlines this morning, but to my knowledge, it's not an echo chamber on this, on every major news outlet discussing this at the moment.
Complete whiteout.
Complete whiteout. There we go. Complete whiteout. So here we go. Once again, independent media with access to those who know are providing these detailed information. Can you give us further perspective on where you think we are, given the collapse of regulation, given what's going on at the Federal Reserve, and of course, all things just massive failure at the DOJ?
Well, I think David said it quite well. Jamie Dimon 6 months ago said the economy is deteriorating. 6 months ago, Paul Krugman had on Nathan Tankus talking about how the backstop for Treasury are hedge funds and private equity. My entrepreneurial friends were saying hedge funds and private equity are in trouble 6 months ago, and people are trying to dump. Private equity is trying to dump its holdings. The New York Times ran the story this week that private equity is in trouble and trying to dump its holdings. The only thing holding up the economy has been AI. So the question becomes, and AI, many people think, is either a speculative bubble or worse, the 1,000-pound gorillas fighting among each other to see who's going to be the person left standing with a monopoly position on the hottest new technology. That is, that all this spending is not producing anything productive. It is rather rent-seeking, the fight for the position in what is likely to be a monopolistic economy going forward. Now, if that's what's happening before we get to this point, then the question is, when there's a real crisis, what happens? The public didn't like the bailouts the last time, and indeed it was, Tea Party Republicans who were most opposed to the bailouts of the big financial entities like AIG. This time around, it's going to be a majority of the country opposed to the bailouts. And if the inevitable crash occurs, and I can't see, it seems to me if Putin were planning the downfall of America, he would be planning almost everything Donald Trump has done. The combination of stupid deregulation with nobody really keeping tabs and weakening the expertise by the people who have to be able to respond quickly to forestall a crisis. After all, as bad as the financial crisis was, the Fed under Ben Bernanke certainly performed admirably in preventing a global financial meltdown of the order. I'm not talking about dollar amounts, I'm talking of the prolonged Great Depression, which he had studied and knew was due to the stupid measures of the Fed and tariffs that followed the Wall Street crash. So you at least have to give them credit for that. If it happens now, there is no bipartisan support for bailouts. There is no adult in charge with the credibility and knowledge of a Ben Bernanke. I mean, Jerome Powell isn't in that league, and Jerome Powell is a whole lot better than whoever is about to replace him. So what happens at that point? My optimism. The MAGA fever has to burst, and it bursts only if MAGA, not just Trump, but MAGA, is seen as responsible for this. And Democrats have to have an agenda. The New Deal agenda was implemented during World War II. The 30s reforms were not enough. World War II brought us 90% marginal tax rates, which were incredibly important, not as revenue raisers so much as something that capped the power of the oligarchs to dictate the fate of everyone else. And
Jim, they also encouraged reinvestment. Why take the money if the government gets 90 cents? Oh, let's expand the business so you could grow your wealth, but not your income. That was the genius of 90% rates.
yeah, I mean, my storyline is take the difference between George Romney, the dad, and Mitt Romney, the son. Both ran for president. Both had been governors of important states. Both ran for president bragging of their business success. But in George's case, business success meant the health of American motors. In Mitt's case, it was how much money he had at the Cayman Islands. No one, not even really Mitt, cared about bank capital. It was an extraction device. But American motors mattered, at least in the mid 60s. And that's exactly right. It is because of high marginal tax rates. So Democrats have to be prepared, and what they need are enemies. So this time around, I mean, right now, Elon Musk has personified the idiocy of tech overlords who don't give a damn about anyone but themselves. We need a financial titan to go next to Elon Musk as a symbol of everything wrong with the MAGA economy.
And Bill, to kind of close this up, we'll give final words to David Cay, but I want to ask you this question. Look, back in the GFC, we knew, of course, the word on the street was moral hazard, and then, of course, followed by the Volcker rule. And we know in the aftermath of TARP, and we know because of Randall Wray and the incredible work by the Levy Institute, what exactly went into the bailouts, which were much, much larger than anybody in the United States has any comprehension of, or at least a vast majority of the Americans. Perverse incentives is the name of the game. And when you continue to do this, the polite word is moral hazard. I call it socialism for criminals, Bill, given what we understand about, control fraud and, of course, all things, the like of modern executive compensation. Can you give us kind of a closeout here, particularly in the silence and the vacuum of media, because this is the context of everything, is it not? Is this not how power, money, and influence, drive the country at the moment?
Well, it's the two things, and that's what June in particular has written about, and I want to apply it to what David Cay said. First, there's always the myth of who lost the war, right? The Nazi myth, the Jews stabbed us in the back. In this case, it was, as David had introduced, this huge campaign to say poor people were the problem. And the problem was the government tried to do something good for poor people. And remember the Santelli rant? Think of the obscenity of that. Now, these are the very guys who drove the crisis. He's talking in the trading room, and the trading room erupts in cheers when he attacks poor people for getting mortgages, which had nothing to do with the great financial crisis, it turned out, right? In fact, it was liar's loans. And what a liar's loan, it cost 70% of the losses. Another economic study, 70% of the losses that drove the GFC. What do liar's loans do? They inflate the borrower's income, not suppress it. And who put the lies in liar's loans? Not the borrowers. It was the loan brokers incentivized by the institution. It was precisely the people cheering this thing that the Jews caused it equivalent, except this time around it was the poor people. So there are always two stories. right? The one story is to demonize the poor, and the other is to use it, as you were saying, as an excuse to transfer immense amounts of money to the wealthy. And as David Kay has emphasized, to set up a one-way bet in which, tails I win, heads you lose, you being the US public. So that is what we're seeing.
David, final words to you, because the setup for me is like you've been in the trenches for decades. You've told us everything there is about this predatory financialization, of which, of course, Donald Trump played a role of predation and all sorts of fraud throughout his entire career, right? All of this is coming to a head. Most people have their eyes on the Epstein files, obviously what the next war is and everything else, but it's always the bottom line, what's happening to your pocketbook and everyday families. So without the work that you guys have done to explore this, what is your message to the general public as well as those in media?
Well, just let me add a little intrigue that may help get some people watching this to go read the DC report piece. One of the first places bailed out in the 2008 was an offshore company called Liquid Funding, owned by Jeffrey Epstein and Bear Stearns.
Yep. And bailed out.
So the problem we're facing right now going forward, I think, has got two major elements. One of them is the non-regulatory actions, the just we see no evil position of the regulators, because that's what they've been told to do, and bureaucrats do what they're told to do, is further enabling these very risky bets. We don't know the full scope of them, but we know that a lot of very high risk behavior is going on. And the New York Fed has told us that they anticipate there's going to be more problems down the road. There's not a lot we're going to be able to do about that. The system is the system as it is right now. The second thing to keep in mind is that we have a literally pro-criminal president in the White House. I mean, I know Donald very well. I have spent hundreds of hours with him. And I wrote about him becoming president way back in 1988 when people thought that was kind of nuts. He has no idea what he's doing. He doesn't know anything. It's all bluster. And if a collapse comes, he will listen to whoever's in the room who tells him whatever flatters him. There's no competence here of the kind Ben Bernanke provided, for example. I agree. Well, far from perfect. The Fed things could have been a lot worse. And Donald is the third generation head of a 4-generation white collar crime family. One of the biggest not widely recognized problem in this country is that we've done a very good job of suppressing the traditional crime families. The mafia, whether it's Albanian or Italian or Russian. But we've seen the rise of white-collar crime families. They don't break your legs. They don't kill you. They steal with contracts and lies, and government agencies not being persuaded not to do their job. So I'm very concerned that if we see things start to come apart, banks not being able to cover these bad bets they've made, businesses that find out that their hedges have been hedged to the nth degree and they don't work. Whatever triggers a break, this administration will make it worse because they don't know what they're doing. They don't understand how the world works. They just know how to grift. And that's to me, the really scary part of this. And they will immediately start blaming, well, it's the Mexicans, the murderers and rapists, and it's the this, and it's the that, and it's the Democratic Party is a terrorist organization nonsense. So that's what we should be really worried about, that even though they're not perfect, we need to have people who are well-intentioned. And these people, they're not. The reason they get picked and promoted is they're badly intentioned, and they're not going to change. Leopards don't change their spots. So I would be very cautious and very conservative about anything you do for the time being. Now, and also remember, things can go on for quite a while with patches. So maybe all the way through the Trump administration, nothing will go wrong. But at some point, there will be a serious serious economic problem. And it will spread as fast as a crack does on the surface of a lake when too much weight's put on it and suddenly you fall into the water, the freezing water. So.
Well, thank you to you all. Happy New Year to you all and to the audience. Please tune in to this new Untouchable station as we continue to work with the Government Accountability Project and bring stories that mainstream media seemingly has no interest in that affect us all. On behalf of Paul Peltier, William K. Black, Marc Dann, June Carbone, thank you to David Cay Johnston. Please go to DC Report to check out this article, of course, and share it far and wide. I'm going to bring it up again real quick here, which is the title with, I love Jamie Dimon is on the cover here, all things considered. Of course, big banks enjoy stealth bailouts. And again, that's the story of the day. And thank you to you all. Take care and all the best.